Oh, thank you for joining us. Let's get into our conversation, the first conversation for today. And of course, looking at the recent hike in customs duty, which has sparked widespread concern and discussion within the business community. And it carries significant implications for businesses and the economy, particularly amid the Central Bank of Nigeria's Forex reforms. The CBN recently raised the custom duty exchange rate for the computation of import duty from 952 naira to 1,352 naira 88 kobo per dollar. The decision to increase customs duty rate has drawn both criticism, with industry bodies and stakeholders expressing their perspectives on the matter. Well, there you have it. For more perspective on this development, I'm being joined by the CEO Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprises, Dr. Muda Yusuf. He joins me virtually now. Thank you, Dr. Muda, for your time on the program. Good to see you again.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be with you.
All right. Well, this is the second time in 2 months, of course, that the CBN will be raising, import duty, and the fifth in 7 months. What does this mean for businesses?
Well, it poses a very serious challenge for businesses, especially in the context of the prevailing economic conditions. We have had 2 major reforms. The first subsidy, which is related to the oil and gas sector reform, and the foreign exchange reform. These are very important reforms. They are inevitable reforms, which unfortunately has come with very, high and very serious impact, negative impact on businesses. But we hope that with time, we'll get over it. But the third dimension of the difficulty that businesses are facing has to do with trade, international trade. The trade cost in Nigeria generally before now has been extremely very high. And if you are talking about issue of ease of doing business and all of that, we need to worry about the escalation of trade costs. So what has happened with respect to the benchmark exchange rate for the computation of import duty is that it has been very volatile, then it has been extremely very high, compounding the problem that businesses have been grappling with, both from the point of view of the energy cost and the cost of the exchange rate. So this is an additional burden, which is making it difficult for businesses to clear their cargo at the port. First is the frequency of the changes. In the last 6 months, we have seen about 6 changes. We started from 422 naira to the dollar. Today we are talking about 1,413 naira to the dollar. In an environment where businesses are already grappling with a very weak currency, depreciation, high energy costs, and all of that. The frequency of the changes is making planning extremely difficult, because each time it even changes, it is with immediate effect. So even transactions that are in the pipeline, transactions to which clearing agents and importers and contractors have made commitment to their clients, those transactions are also affected, which is contrary to the general governance principle in terms of fiscal policy. Because fiscal policy normally, even under this present administration, there's always a time frame for the transition of between 2 to 3 months before it takes effect. But for this particular one, it takes effect immediately. So it's a major source of disruption. It's a major source of dislocation for businesses, and it's also creating a lot of uncertainty. So we need these rates to be more stable. Secondly, we need the rates to be much lower, to be able to provide some succor, not only for businesses, but even for the citizens. We cannot have a situation where we have high energy costs, we have a depreciating exchange rate, and on top of that, we now have high import duty. If there is any window of opportunity to bring relief to Nigerians, I think it's in the area of trade. And one way to start is to look at this first, to start with this CBN benchmark exchange rate. My advice is that the CBN should review this upward, this 1,413. I think they should bring it to around 800 or 700, so that the transmission effect to the citizens in terms of lowering cost of living, reducing cost of production could be a lot more impactful in the light of what the government is trying to do. This is not to diminish the importance of the reforms, and this is not in any way obstructing the reforms. The reforms around the foreign exchange can still go on. The reforms around the energy sector can go on, but around trade, I think it's important to give some soft landing, to give some succor both to citizens and to businesses. So it is important that we have a review.
Okay. Talk to us more about how industry bodies and stakeholders are responding to the increase in custom duty, particularly in sectors such as consumer goods and all that. So what are the immediate expected changes to happen in these sectors?
Well, the immediate expected changes that will happen is increase in cost. Because, within the last few months, within the last 3 months, we have seen an increase of close to 40% or more. And you know what it is if you bring in a product, and we are not just talking about consumer products. We are talking about raw materials. We are talking about pharmaceutical products. We are talking about energy products. We are talking about machineries. So it's something that affects all sectors, including the very critical sectors of the economy. So the cost of production, the cost of operation is already very high. So with this development, we are likely to see an even higher cost of production, higher cost of prices, inflationary pressure. So for them, their cost of production will increase, profit margins will decrease, because in most cases, these producers are not able to transfer all these additional costs to their consumers, because there is very high consumer resistance. Purchasing power is already very weak. So that is why it's going to have a very negative impact on everybody, both the consumers, the producers, the shareholders, and so on. It's going to affect them. So that is why it is important we continue to plead with the Central Bank of Nigeria to have a review of this benchmark interest rate and to make it a lot more stable. If you look at the tariff book,
hello, Dr. Muda. Well, I think we lost connection with
the tariff book.
Okay,
provides
go ahead.
Import tariffs. The tariff books that that governs the fiscal policy regime. Those tariff books is for 7 years. It's a 7-year tariff book, and there's a reason for that. It's to provide that stability for businesses to plan, importers, producers, and all of that, so that we change this tariff, you review it every 7 years. It's to ensure stability. So when you now have a situation where you have this angle of the exchange rate benchmark changing so frequently, it makes planning very difficult. So these are some of the challenges it poses for investors across all sectors.
All right. So one of the statements you put out there when this development this news came out is that you're suggesting that the determination of exchange rate for import duty computation should be handled by the fiscal authorities instead of the current approach. Can you help us understand this position better?
No, the suggestion that the CPP was making there is that this is a trade policy matter. What affects import duty, apart from the exchange rate itself, that is the exchange rate with which people procure the foreign exchange to import. Apart from that, any other thing that impacts on trade flows should be within the remit of the fiscal authorities. That is anything that will directly impact on the import duty, the port levy, or the fees that you pay at the port, anything that affects the cost of trade should be a fiscal policy matter. It's not something we leave within the remit of the central bank. Otherwise, it will be causing a lot of misalignment between what the fiscal policy focus is and what the monetary authorities are doing. Because sometimes the monetary authorities don't know the implications, the fiscal implications, the trade implications of some of these policies. So that is why we are advocating that the issue of the benchmark exchange rate should be moved to the fiscal space, to the fiscal authorities, so that they can easily align it with the overall fiscal policies. So that whatever is happening in the foreign exchange market does not directly affect import duty and does not directly affect trade. We had something similar under the previous administration, when the central bank was coming up with all sorts of policies that was affecting trade. One of it was the 43 items which the present administration removed, and the argument was that this is a trade policy matter. So this issue of the benchmark interest rate is also a trade policy matter. Let it rest with the fiscal authorities for stability, for planning, for predictability, and for proper alignment with fiscal policies, in line with what the present administration also seeks to achieve. That's of ensuring a conducive environment for investors. I think that will be more like it for me.
Okay, so in terms of essential products, I mean, there's essential product that we need to give preferences to. So what are your recommendations with regards to, because some have suggested that, look, perhaps you have to exclude some product from this custom duty and maybe not to stifle the economy or the market and to make the market competitive. So what would your recommendation be as regard this?
No, you see, the present administration is committed to easing the pains of the current reforms. That is why the president has announced a number of palliatives. But in addition to the palliatives, the government can also look in the direction of our trade policies to cushion the effects of the current reforms, to reduce the current high cost of living. And that is, apart from the issue of the benchmark exchange rate, we can take a look at the totality of our tariffs, of our import duty, for the critical items, critical raw materials, machineries, raw materials, particularly things that relate to food processing, intermediate products for food processors, those in the food and beverage industry, the machineries, pharmaceutical products, energy products. Let us reduce the import duty generally of all of these things. If we do that, that will help. And if there are borders that are still closed, but there's a sense in which even cross-border trade also help to reduce some of this burden. I'm not talking about smuggling now. I'm talking about trade, legitimate trade. So there are borders that are still closed. Let us open it, so that, we can see some movement of goods, that could help to support the supply side without creating any problems for domestic industries, because we need to also ensure a balance in that. So there is a very big window for trade policy, for tariff policy, for import duty moderation or review, to be able to cushion the effects of the current reforms on the citizens. So I think the administration can look more in that direction, and I'm sure we'll have a lot more impact, because the impact will be systemic. If you take bread, for instance, look at what are the critical inputs for the production of bread. If there are elements of it in which we can reduce the tariff, let us do so. The same thing with sugar, the same thing with cooking gas, the same thing with diesel, machineries, the same thing with pharmaceutical products. Let us crash all the taxes, import duty. Let us crash all those things. That will bring a lot of relief.
Just permit me to jump in here a bit. Are you suggesting that when you talk about border opening and all of that, are you suggesting that the federal government should open the border totally to some of the products that were banned in the first instance? And don't forget that the border were closed in the first place because the federal government wanted to also help the local market, local production to grow as well.
No, I'm not talking of products that are already banned. No. Some borders have been opened. Some borders, for instance, have been opened. Some of the borders in the north have been opened. I'm talking about the border closure that was announced for reasons of insecurity by the Buhari administration. That does not affect whatever products are banned. Those products that are banned should remain banned in the interest of our local manufacturing companies. For those ones that are not banned, there is no need closing the border against them. That is the point I'm making. We should do it in a way that will not be injurious to our domestic manufacturing companies. That is the point I'm making. I'm making this point because trade is also a very important instrument for mitigating hardship in any economy. So that is why I'm making this point. We have to ensure a balance. We have to protect our industries, of course, but we also need to ensure that we facilitate trade in a way that will also help to reduce the current hardship.
Let's look at what businesses can do. What strategies are you recommending for businesses to employ in order to mitigate the impact of the custom duty hike on the import costs and overall operational expenses? Don't forget that the CBN says this is starting with immediate effect, so which means that they have started paying for, the new hike already or the new price.
Well, this is a democracy, and the starting point will be to still appeal to the Central Bank of Nigeria to review that benchmark rate. That is a starting point because, the whole essence of some of these policies is also to improve the lives of the citizens. So we should not, if there are policies that are imposing too much burden, and if there are policies that are avoidable, we should avoid them. I cannot overemphasize that. We need to still appeal to the Central Bank to review that rate and to ensure that we have stability with that rate. For the citizens, for the businesses, the businesses are trying their best to survive under these very difficult conditions. Many of them have scaled down their operations. They are doing a lot to reduce their cost of operation. What you can also advise is for them to continue to look at their cost structure, to continue to look inwards. If there are substitutes for imports, it will embrace the whole philosophy of import substitution so that we reduce the pressure on our foreign exchange and the pressure of looking for all these dollars and worrying about the import duty. This should also begin to look at the issue of energy efficiency, because cost of energy is one of the biggest costs that are affecting many businesses. So energy efficiency policy at the micro level of businesses is something that businesses can also look at. And businesses can also look at, the changes in the dynamics of demand, the market structure. Because of the current situation, demand preferences are changing. Purchasing power is also reducing. So we have to tailor our products to reflect, what is happening in the market so that we can keep our businesses going. Those are some of the things I think our businesses can do from the point of view of business strategy. But more importantly, it's for us to look at all these macroeconomic issues and ensure that they are much more investment friendly. The reforms are good, they are painful though, but if there are windows of opportunity to reduce the pain of the reforms, we should embrace it, which is why I was emphasizing the issue of trade and reduction in trade costs.
Well, I think we should leave it there. Thank you so much, Dr. Moda Yusuf, CEO, CPPE. Thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you very much.